one or two key things that really affect us here. This is what we call altitude-based priorities. In the airspace from the ground up to 4,000 feet, the government's environmental priority is to limit and, where possible, reduce the total adverse effects on people. In other words, from the ground up to 4,000 feet, reducing noise is the priority. It then goes on. In the airspace from 4,000 feet up to 7,000 feet, the environmental priority should continue to be minimizing the impact of noise unless the CAA is satisfied that the evidence presented by the sponsor demonstrates this would disproportionately increase CO2 emissions. In other words, the impact of carbon emissions is beginning to come into play there, where it wasn't below 4,000 feet. In other words, in order to avoid a town, the plane has to fly a huge big round like that. They'd probably say between 4,000 feet. No, don't do that. That's unnecessary carbon. Just go straight over it because you're higher up. And all changes below 7,000 feet should take into account local circumstances and should not be agreed to or by the CAA before appropriate community engagement has been conducted by the sponsor, which is what's happening just now. There is a guideline document called CAP 1616, and that lays out the stages by which an airspace change now takes place. The one before, as I told you, Edinburgh did all the work, presented the stuff to the CAA. The CAA found a wee mistake, so that's it, chucked out. That was a waste of an awful lot of useful work that had gone on. So they changed, they brought in this new system, CAP 1616, and it's made up of 7 stages. And an airport, or as they call it, a sponsor trying to introduce this change, has to pass each stage in turn before they can get on to the next one. So they do stage 1 first, they have to pass the stage 1 gateway, then they can go on to stage 2, they have to pass the stage 2 gateway, and stage 3, they've just passed the stage 3 gateway. It took 2 or 3 goes to actually pass it, and now they can start the consultation, which is what we're doing. After that, there's next stage is they have to take into account all the comments that come in. They have to, and assuming that gets okayed, then they have to go on to, I think there's some more technical work they have to do, devising the routes and the instructions for all the computers and air traffic controllers. Then they have to think about training pilots. And eventually, if all this goes to plan, the earliest they're now anticipating this will come into force will be 2028. So it's that sort of time it takes to get through all the stages. And that's if everything goes smoothly. If there's any hold-ups, they have to go back and revisit some bits, it'll probably take even longer. So, that's probably enough of the background, but I think the background is quite important to understand exactly what's going on. Yeah, let me just start. I'll use these as a diagram to help. There's really, I think, only one thing that you're all going to be concerned about, and that's the planes arriving onto runway 24. But let's just look at the elements first of all. Let's do arrivals onto 06, which really don't affect us at all. I don't know how well you can see this. The navigation-based system, the first point they aim to if they're coming to Edinburgh is what's called a hold area. There's one down about just round about Peebles there, and there was one about there, and there was one up there. And that's the first thing they aim to. So if they're coming up from the south, they came to that one there. If it was all clear, they would then be directed by the air traffic controllers from there out to Inchkeith, which very, very conveniently happens to be in line with the runway, and then they would go in and land on the runway there. Or if it's runway 06, which is what this one's showing, they'd go to the hold,
They then be, again, vectored by the air traffic controllers around there and come and land. And those arrivals don't come anywhere near Madrid. So, as far as we're concerned, that's all right. And the other one that doesn't really matter is departures on 2-4. Departures on 2-4. And you see it's the same sort of thing here. There's the runway. They take off, and they would either have flown off down that way, or flown down that way, or whatever. The map. The actual routes on here are not the current ones, this is the proposed ones. And I'll explain a little more about it in just a second.